So we continue this conversation. If you haven't been part of it, we've been at it for quite a while. I think this is the 14th or 15th week, and the topic has been from here to there and back again. And it's just been places where we start at a place as humans, or even looked at the life of Jesus. He went there, he went from life to death, and he came back again. That's kind of the gist of this focus. And then last week I told you, hey, let's talk about some practical things that we'll look, because we looked at the life of Jesus and what that meant, but then we're going to do some practical things. Today's going to be like one of those movies where sometimes they're a little frustrating. It starts at the end of the movie, and you're kind of wondering what in the world's going on, and then then it goes back to, and it kind of works out all the details and that. So today, instead of starting from here and going to there, we're going to start there. And we're going to start there. And if you follow along with the Bible, sometimes we skip around, sometimes we kind of hover, and we are going to hover today in Joshua chapter 24. As you will see, this is an epic event, an epic in history, and also for the history of Israel, and also from a biblical point of view. This is the last speech of Joshua. And so we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. But so before we get there, we're going to look at the time that he actually died. Joshua lived to be 110 years old. He ate kale. That's in there. You just have to read closely enough. I try to tell you, people. In the book that follows immediately, the book of Joshua, he's in the book of Judges, and we're in the book of Judges just for a couple of passages, and then we'll jump right into Joshua 24. So Judges chapter 2, we see the death of Joshua. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. After that, the entire generation, the whole generation, had been gathered to their father. So all the people that lived in his age. Another generation grew up who neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Now, this is not the topic of this subject today, but there's only one reason why that happens, and it's the lack of discipleship. Now, that's a horse I ride a lot, but the only reason somebody doesn't know something about something is because nobody told them something. Right? It's just that simple. Why didn't they know? Because the generation that followed Joshua obviously didn't say, hey, let me tell you about the Red Sea. Let me tell you about all these things. Another topic for another day. But this is a dilemma in a culture that dismisses God and forgets God. It's a relative topic, even though this is an ancient manuscript, an ancient story, an ancient intersection. It could have been written last Thursday. In a culture, in a school system, in a government system, in a country, in a neighborhood, in a family, whatever unit you want to talk about, when God is no longer in the mix, things will fall apart. It's just history. And if you read, especially in the Old Testament, it is like one big yo-yo. They're in, they're out. They're in, they're walking with God, they forget about God. Things fall apart. Oh no, please help us. Okay, we're back in with God. Another generation comes, and then it falls apart. And it just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So it's a natural consequence in Judges chapter 2 and verse 11. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and they served other imaginary false gods. They're called Baals. There's different words for them, but they had created their own religion, for heaven's sakes. Well, yeah, that's what happens. They forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshiped various gods of the people around them. That is the key to our conversation today. The conversation today, from here to there and back again, is that they were here with God, but we're starting at the end of the story where they're there away from God. And if we are not being influenced by God, we will be overly influenced by the culture around us. Let's read it again. They forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshiped various gods of the people around them. Listen, we are going to be influenced one way or the other. That's just, when I go to places, I've been to places like the Middle East and they're wearing like robes. I'm like, it's such an amazingly smart idea. I really wish we wore more robes as guys, but I'm not going to be the first one in our culture. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, they're really cool. The air is flowing up your, skirt there, or whatever they want to call it. I'm like, that's a brilliant idea. So I'm going to call on one of you guys to start next week, if you would. Just you be the first, and then people will just naturally follow, right? So we're going to be influenced one way or the other around our culture. And listen, let's not reinvent the wheel. What we find from history, this is real history, it's not fables. What we find from real history and human behavior is when we leave God out, forsake God, when we leave him out or miniaturize him, then more influence, because there's influence all around us. I find it interesting, those words, they worship various gods of the people around them. Sure they did. They provoked the Lord to anger because they forsook him. And they served this imaginary god Baal and this other one, the Asherites, which is another false religion and imaginary god. Now, that's the end of the movie. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of the movie. Now we're in Joshua chapter 24. This scene, as I said, is epic. Let me read the first verse. Then Joshua assembled the entire nation, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands. I just want you to put yourself in this moment. Here's Joshua speaking and having the luxury of knowing this is my final speech. Most human beings don't have that luxury. You don't know what your last words are going to be. It's like, hey, I got it on the calendar. Next Thursday at 3 be my last farewell speech to earth, and then I'm going to pass into the next life around 5 o'clock on Friday. It just you don't have that, right? But everybody knew it. This was like the epic moment in the end of Deuteronomy where Moses did the exact same thing. This is the farewell speech. Now notice it was Joshua, it was everybody, and they're at this place called Shechem. He summoned the elders, the leaders, the judges, the officials, the governors, the mayors, the senators, the House of Representatives, all of that, if you want to put it in our terms. He gathered every national leader, and he said, and they presented themselves before God. Let me pause a little and tell you why there's two reasons this is epic intersection. Number one, as we would say in our language, Joshua was the man. He was the guy that was with the hero of the Old Testament, Moses. He was the guy that got invited to go to places that nobody else got to go. He was with Moses at that close intersection with God. He was with Moses in the private meetings that God had. So he had this reputation that he was the one that received the baton from Moses. That would be like somebody saying, Billy Graham he came to this, Bob Smith and said, Bob is taking over from here. It's like, wow, that adds a little bit of epicness. Would you agree? If you think about it, Caleb and Joshua were the only ones who survived 40 years in the wilderness. Every other adult died. And I was laying in bed last night, I was thinking about this. I'm like, how many funerals and burials did Joshua see? Think about that. When they left Israel, there were about 3 million, most scholars would say. That's a lot of funerals in 40 years. And he went through that rugged. Then after Moses died, the baton in his hand, then the early chapters of the book of Joshua are all about conquest. This was like General Patton at the front of the army, leading war after war after war. Can you imagine, just for a second, put yourself in that moment where all the nation is quiet. You can hear a pin drop, and here's this hero standing before them. I'm wondering, literally, if you think about the details, how many wrinkles at 110 as a warrior, a fierce warrior, were etched into his face? Can you imagine? He's about to speak. Not only that, he intentionally gathered at this place called Shechem. Now, most, everyday people, they're not going to quite know what the significance of that was. But if you look at the Bible, the first 11 chapters of the Bible, the first 11 chapters of Genesis, hey, we're just getting going here. We got a few chapters of the garden. Then we got Cain and Abel in chapter 4. Then we got, some generations going. By the time you get to chapter 6, you got Noah. Then you got 6, 7, 8 and Noah. And then, 9 and the flood and all that. And, we got to kind of restart. Then we step off the boat and here's some more generations. And then you what's called the Table of Nations. Genesis chapter 11, you got the whole thing with the Tower of Babel. And then it's almost like in Genesis 12, God says, okay, let's start. Okay. And what we're going to start here is the nation of Israel. And of the nation of Israel, Abraham is the patriarch. He is the very, very beginning, starting line, starting block from that moment on until the rest of time, the nation of Israel. And it all started with this one man called Abraham. And it all started at the call when he called Abraham at this point called Shechem. This is a historic figure at a historic GPS location in this moment with the entire nation. I'm trying to pull you into the narrative. Are you getting the importance of this story? And so as he begins, he starts with the history, knowing it's like standing at Gettysburg and then bringing in the history, and you're just feeling like, man, I am in this story, because here's the importance for you and me. We are in this story. That's why we come together. We're in this story. We think, okay, that was way back then. I mean, they were, doing their thing. No, we are part. This is our generation. And so as he begins, watch how he begins the speech in verse 2. Joshua opens his speech with this. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago, your forefathers, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Abraham's brother Nahor, lived beyond the river. So they had not been called yet. So they're living their life, and not only in a location, but as you see, beyond the river is a culture. Why? Because here it is, they worshiped other gods. What God is saying, this is where we came from. Every one of us, we came from this calling of Abraham, but before that, his dad and Abraham's brother Nahor, they were in another culture. And so he then begins, for the sake of time, won't be able to go through the whole speech, obviously, in Joshua chapter 24. But then he goes into Moses, and then how, the Israelites went into Egypt and how God worked a miracle and brought them out. And he's going through the story, and then he goes through all the conquests of the early part of Joshua. So he's really just saying, let me give you a history. Are you tracking? Now, at this point, he then says, I'm going to give you a call to action. Based on this speech and this word from God, I'm going to give you a call to action. And the call to action is the same call to action as we have now. And here it is. Every human being in every region of the world and every generation lives in a culture. If you're going to follow God, you cannot be an integral part of being influenced by that culture. You can't be influenced by God and completely influenced by the culture around you. In other words, let me say it in a more simple way. You have to move out of the culture that is around you and into the heart of God, because there is not an exception to this rule. They're not the same. Now, does that mean you become a nomad and you just live in a tent and just be completely culturally, irrelevant? I was going to say irreverent. Yeah, one of those. No, we're not saying that. But the thing that tantalizes in the culture around us cannot tantalize the person who's walking with God. Where your passion is, where your fire is, will not be the same as the culture around you. So the call to action comes in verse 14 of Joshua 24. He says, now fear the Lord, serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods of your forefathers, worship, there it is, beyond the river, before Abraham was called. And also when you guys got to Egypt, you started worshiping other gods. Now what's significant? And then he says, and serve the Lord. So there's the call to action. You got to leave that culture behind. You got to have this thing going on with God. Because if you don't have this thing going on with God, you are going to serve, you're going to be in the culture. And unless you leave the culture, you can't have this. You see, they are always separate in the Bible and in real life, by the way. They're always separate. If you're caught up with with all of the trappings and the temptations of this culture, trust me, you can't be walking with God. It just doesn't work that way. Now, it's interesting that he called for their gods because also at Shechem, if you know the story of Jacob, and Jacob discovered that his family had all these false gods, these statues, etc. And Jacob called, way after Abraham, right? Called for all of his family members and everybody around him, bring your foreign gods right here to this place. And guess where it was? Right in the same spot. After there was a conquest, the first major conquest, it was Joshua who said, we're going to build an altar to God. And guess where it was? Right in that same spot. You getting the epicness of this? In other words, this is where the nation of Israel started. This is exactly where Jacob called out for the false gods. This is where we celebrate and built an altar after the first conquest. And here is Joshua saying, here's my farewell speech, and it's going to happen right here at Shechem. It was a sacred space for them historically. Now he calls us to action, and he say to serve. But I want to make sure that we all understand that it's a choice. God will not make us serve him. God will not make us leave the culture around us or repel, maybe a better word, repel the trappings of the culture around us. Now, what do I mean? Let me pause for a second, because I don't want to just remain conceptual here. What I mean by that is our culture will say, all gods are the same. That's what our culture says. For many, it doesn't matter. You pick Muhammad, you pick Jesus, you pick whoever that might be. All roads lead to the same path. It not only is not true, it cannot be true. It cannot be true because there was only one perfect Savior of the world who died for the sins of men. No other religion or faith, respectfully said, addresses the sin of humanity and how we can, outside of human effort, find our way to God. It was only Jesus who came and offered himself on a cross that we might find ourselves to God and find our sins and forgiven, that we might stand before God as if we've never sinned, and that's the only way we can have a relationship with you. It doesn't say, this is not to say our religion is better than you. Who cares? It really is. There's only one path to God. See, culture around us begins to erode all of the realities that God created. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that there is one creator of this universe. This week, perhaps you saw the pictures from the Webb telescope. Fascinating, just fascinating. I began to tear up. I don't know if you saw them. This is I think it was a $10 billion telescope that just puts the Hubble it looks like a microscope or something. It's just amazing. And then when they opened it up, I was listening to a radio station, a secular radio station, and they were like, this takes us back 13.5 billion years. When you start measuring light years. And we know that creation started 13.8 billion years ago. I'm like, oh, you do? That is interesting. I didn't get that textbook in my science class, but you know more than I do. And the whole point was like we're 0.3 billion years away from knowing the beginning of time, as if man could know that. God is beyond our understanding, but we understand that when you look at that, it is like becomes insane to me how you can look at all those galaxies upon galaxies upon galaxies and think that it came from a spore. That's crazy. Respectfully said. There is a creator. There is a savior. He has created us to love. He has created us man and woman. He's created family units. He's created love. He's created forgiveness. All of these things are from God, and culture will always convince you to leave him out of your schools, of your workplaces, of all around that. And everywhere we are, it is going contrary to the flow and the reality of God. And when we buy into it, just like our world right now, it begins to fall apart. So he says, but it's your choice. Joshua 24:15, but if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, if this is not your gig, as we would say as a musician, if this is not your bag, then you choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods of your forefathers beyond the river, that culture, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you're living right now. If you want a piece of that, go for it. But as for me and my household, oh Lord, you can have our hearts. We're going to serve you. We're going to sing that beautiful song, Lead Me to the Cross. That's how we're going to roll. Now, you have a choice. What an amazing final speech. What an amazing final speech. Then there's three things that happen here. Because again, we can walk out super inspired, but how do you anchor it? How do you walk out to your car today and think, okay, I got some things to hold on to? And Joshua does the same thing. He's going to give three anchors. And some of them are strange. One of them especially. In other words, culture, I used to live on the East Coast. I used to live in Daytona Beach for 5 or 6 years. And the beach is different over there. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's a little bit more rascally, a little more raw, a little more, this is more calm over here. It's beautiful on both ends, but it's a little more wild. And my wife and I, when we first got married, we lived on this little apartment right across on A1A on the other side of the ocean. And we would walk every day, and every day was different. Sometimes it'd be jellyfish all over the time place. Sometimes it was really rough and et cetera. But here's one thing that was common every single day, at least in the Atlantic Ocean. If you went swimming in the ocean and you were just like tooling around, chest deep, et cetera, tooling around, you better keep your eye on where you are, because the undertow, the flow that's going underneath you, sometimes is more than others. It will give you a warning when it's too much. And you'll get out of swimming, or fooling around the ocean, for just a little bit and like, man, where am I? Because here it is, unbeknownst to you. Unbeknownst to you. It has drifted. So Joshua is about to give us three anchors to hold us down in the midst of a drifting culture. Okay? We begin in verse 21, still in Joshua 24. Verse 21. But the people said to Joshua, because he said, they said, we're going to, you choose to serve the Lord. And then they said, we'll serve the Lord. And surprisingly, he said, no, you won't. That kind of took the fun out of the party. No, you're not going to serve it. And then they said, but the people says, no, we will serve the Lord. And then Joshua said, here's your first anchor then. You are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord. In other words, as you are in your workplace, neighborhood, gym, wherever you might be, the first thing to anchor you is don't forget the commitment that you have made to Christ. In those moments you have said, you have sung today, lead me to the cross, God. Lead me to self-surrender. So when I'm with friends, if you're with friends and they're culturally pulling you in, like, know what? I'm going to listen to my voice. And my voice has said, lead me to the cross. My voice has said, watch, it's crazy. Yes, we are witnesses. They replied to our own voice, to our own choice, right? Let me go back. You are witnesses against yourself that you have chosen, right? That's the first thing, chosen to serve the Lord. Yes, we are witnesses to that. Now then, throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord. We sing about it. Yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And all the people said to Joshua, let's say it again, we will serve the Lord God, our God, and obey him. Now, interestingly enough, this is where there's some fascination here. This was the exact same thing that happened at the farewell speech of Moses. But Moses did something really, really different here, unique, and it makes so much sense. At the death of Moses, the Lord said to Moses, we're in Deuteronomy 31. The Lord said to Moses, you're going to die, you're going to rest with your fathers, and these people will soon, wow, what a powerful, hard word, prostitute themselves to the culture around them, to the foreign gods of the land they are entering. They will forsake me. They're going to break the covenant I made with them, and they made with me. So here's what he says. I want you to be a musician. I want you to write a song. That's what he says to Moses. Write a song with the commitment that they have made, because there's something interesting about music. Have you ever, just had a song in your head, you just can't get it out? My wife is like, there are many times she goes, don't sing that song. I hate that song. It's going to get in my head, right? Songs that get in your head. And so he understood, like, if they're singing the words that they've committed to, it might stay up here a little bit more. This is not the sign for crazy. It's going to stay up here. It's going to stay up here. Listen, it's the importance of what we do in worship. One of the importances. We're not only coming before the creator of the universe, but what we are doing is we are speaking out loud, lead me to the cross. Number one. Number two, listen, please listen carefully. That's why we do it regularly. Why? Because we come together, we're committing, we're out loud. And I don't mean to step on any toes. Maybe I do. But when you're in a worship service, I invite you, even if you're not a singer, speak the words. Don't stand in a worship service like this until I'm going to stand because it's over. Until it's over. No, that's not the point. The point is we're coming in and collectively saying that, hey, lead me to the cross. And no worship pastor should ever have to say, come on, let's sing, because we're not. Because we came to make a public commitment. Here's what happens. Am I stepping on your toes too much? You guys all right? All right, just checking in. I really don't care. I just felt like it was a nice thing to ask. So when we're saying this, then we go out to the world, tomorrow at work and then Tuesday, and it begins to edge off. That's why we got to come back. Let's do it again. And we come back. And if I'm in the business of stepping on your toes, let me just go ahead and say, that's why we're not growing as much in the Christian culture, because I'll just come to church when it's convenient, or maybe once a month. And I love you. It's not enough to eat one meal a week. This is not how the body works, and neither does the soul. Why? Because there's something out there grinding against your soul, driven by an enemy who hates you and wants to devour you. It just depends on how serious you are, like Joshua. If that seems undesirable for you, I don't know. But me and Wes, my wife Carrie, and son Ty, we're gonna be serving God. Amen. I got so worked up, I don't even know where I'm at. Now watch this. He writes this song, and then we'll move on. And when many disasters, God speaking to Moses, when many disasters, difficulty come upon them, It's this song. It's the words they spoke. That's going to remind them. It's going to be their anchor. Like, oh, right. It's Tuesday, and the guys at work are looking at this, but I just sang 2 days ago, lead me to the cross. See? That's why it's important. Not playing games here, not singing songs. It's so much more important than that. This song will anchor them, testify against them, because it will not be forgotten by their descendants. Not only do we sing for ourselves, but people, our kids hear us sing. I know what they are disposed to do. Even before I bring them into the land, I promise them on an oath. There's the key. Don't miss it. I know we're digging deep. Keep your minds alert. Listen, he said, I know what they're disposed to do. And as human beings, we are disposed to start mirroring our culture. If we're not walking with God, you need an anchor. You need your own words to anchor yourself. Here's the second thing. Watch what happens in verse 25. On that day, same day, Joshua made a promise, a guarantee, a warranty, a covenant, a promise for the people. And it's no surprise, it's no shocker that, and there at Shechem, he drew up for them decrees and laws, and Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. The first thing is that should drive us when you're at work this week is the commitment that we've spoken out loud. The second thing is the word of God. Let me give you just a little bit of some statistics. So a couple of years ago, I was invited into a small group of leaders around the world to meet with a guy, or around the country, to meet with a guy named John Plake. John Plake is he is with the American Bible Society. He is the guy, he's a numbers guy. I could probably tell you, how many, marbles exist in the U.S. or something. I mean, he's that numbers guy, right? And so they've done an enormous amount of work to figure out how many Bible users are there in the United States using the Bible. But then they divide into 3 categories: Bible engaged, the movable middle, and Bible disengaged. So if you think of the Bible disengaged, like, oh, they don't pick up the Bible. Nope. A Bible disengaged person might read the Bible every day. I do an audible 1-year Bible I've done for a long, long time. I do it almost every day. Did it this morning. Doesn't mean I'm engaged. It just means I'm a user. Engaged means it is modifying your behavior. It is, you're engaged with it to where like, oh, I know I'm disposed to do that, but I'm not going to because this. I know I'm disposed to not do this, but I'm going to because I'm engaged with the Bible. Does that make sense? It's a huge deal. Every year they track in the U.S. how many let's just start with Bible users, okay? So I just want you to see this chart. This is 2022. They measure it about mid-year. 2022, there is a significant drop-off of Bible users. Let me give you just some statistics. That little at the end means in the U.S., 26 million Christians who have said, I'm out. Just this half a year. I am no longer using the Bible. I used to use the Bible. I used to pick it up because most likely they were in the movable middle. And all of a sudden they became disengaged and now they're like, hey, I'm not using it. We are just repeating history. Now that may be you. You may be like, man, I haven't picked up the Bible in a long time. Get out. I'm just kidding. I'm just totally kidding. Look, all of us, including me, sometimes hit those dry spaces and patches where like, man, so it's an invitation, but it's with some seriousness to it. Like, if you're not engaged by the Bible, the culture will engage you. It's just that much. Man, I could go so many statistics there, but here's the deal. Romans 12:2, and then we'll get to our last point. Do not be conformed to the culture of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now watch the pattern. The first one was our voices, right? In other words, our commitment. So I spoke to you strongly, honestly, about the consistency factor. It's important to come back, worship again, say it again, hear it again. Then the culture is going to be eating at you. Good, come back next week. Do the same thing. You're engaged. The same thing is true with the Bible. Do you know what day of the week I don't have the Bible in my head? No days of the week. I'm too scared of myself. So if I am not engaged, renewing means I'm doing it and I'm doing it and I'm doing it and I'm doing it and I'm doing it. And so whatever it takes, if you're an Audible person, get the audio version. It's free. If you're a reader, read it. In other words, but then engage it. It is your anchor. We could spend the entire time. Okay, let's get to this last one. This is where it's fascinating. Okay. In Joshua 24, verse 26. So your own voices, it's going to be an anchor. The word of God is going to be an anchor. Then he took a large stone and he set it up there under the oak near the holy place of the Lord. See, Joshua said, this stone will also be a witness against you. Your voice, the Bible, or an anchor to remind you to keep us from not drifting, an anchor so we don't drift. This stone will be a witness against us. This is really bizarre. This rock, this inanimate object, has heard all the words the Lord has said to us. So if you didn't get it, you rock heads, the rock did. That's basically what he's saying, right? The rock did. It's like anyway, it will be a witness against you if you're untrue to your God. And you think, okay, now wait a minute. Is this like some kind of magic stone? No, it wasn't. It wasn't, because I want you, if we can leave this Bible verse up, I want you to see one little word that's going to what? Then he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak. Okay, who says that? All right, just think about it. I've got this big rock and we set it under an oak tree, right? That's what we normally say. No, he said the rock, the oak. I got this big stone. And by the way, the archaeologists have found the stone. This big limestone they've dug up and they found it underneath the oak tree. Okay, what am I driving at? Watch this. The beginning of the story of Israel starts with Abraham. His name was Abram. Genesis chapter 12, as I said. So Abraham left his culture beyond the river, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him, his nephew. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from his culture, Haran, from across the river. He took with him his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions that had accumulated and the people he had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, that's the promised land, and they arrived there. Abraham traveled through the land as far as the site of the great oak of Moreh at Shechem. See, everybody knew the oak tree. It wasn't just, man, isn't the Bible cool? Otherwise, hey, we put the stone under an oak tree. Nope, you put it under the oak tree. Well, what happened there? At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give you the land you're standing there. Watch. And so he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And that's why it was the holy spot. And guess what? They knew it. They knew it. So what in the world does that stone represent? That stone represents all of the voices that had heard, because stones can live longer than people. They exist longer than people. You know what I mean? Right? all that generation, what it represents is let your own voice be your anchor. Let the Bible be the anchor, but let all the believers that have followed God, that have spoken into generations, also be your anchor. Don't leave them behind and let them down. That's why the end of the story that we began with is so disappointing. A whole generation said, you know what? That old stone, those voices of the past, the Billy Grahams, the D.L. Moody's, the John Wesleys, the Martin Luthers, all those voices, they don't matter. They do matter because it's your time and your generation. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. And we end with this. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses who've died for their faith, let us throw off everything that hinders, the culture and sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. I don't go in the ocean very much. In fact, it's a surprise that I even live in a beach town. I'm a mountain boy. I grew up in Virginia. But it's not just because I love the mountains that I don't swim around the ocean. When I was 11 years old, Daytona Beach was our vacation spot. Once a year, we'd come down from Virginia. And we were swimming on the beach that day. And they had the red flags out. Not a shark, undertow. It was an unusual undertow. There were a couple guys out in the ocean, about the old as my oldest son, 19, 20 years old. And they ignored the red flags. And they ignored the undertow. And they ignored the warnings. My parents did, and they said, come out of the water. Let's just build sandcastles or whatever we're going to do. About 15 minutes, you hear one of the young men going berserk. He was screaming uncontrollably. I can't find him. I can't find him. He went under. He went under. And those lifeguards, they have a way of skipping in the water. It's like, they looked and they looked and they looked and they looked. And they finally found him 20 minutes later. And as an 11-year-old, I sat there and I watched it. It was about the last time I felt really super comfortable on going in the ocean. Unfortunately, human beings, because we're disposed to this, unfortunately, we don't wake up until we're drowning. That's exactly where we started today at the end of the story. Don't ignore the signs, because the voice of culture is getting louder. But God has given you an anchor, a regular commitment, a regular voice of your own, the voice of God in the Bible, and the history of those who've come before us. It's your turn. It's your generation. And if this place has any hope, it's going to be those that love God more than they do the culture around.